Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, July 1st, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about new polls from Change Research. This is a polling firm that has done a number of new polls from New Hampshire, Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona, all of which showing us interesting results and favorable results for the Democratic Party. But one thing that you might notice, and I think you should notice when looking at these polls, are the sponsor. Who is funding the poll and what is the reason for it there? And what you will find is that Change Research is sponsored by Future Majority, a Democratic PAC. This is a sponsor done by the Democratic Party so they can get their own internal numbers, at least for the sake of campaigning. But these numbers are good, and that's probably why they've released them to the mainstream media. You rarely ever see internal polls released to this extent, especially if they're meant to be kept under wraps, but sometimes you see them released as a sort of retaliatory effort, as we talked about Herschel Walker and his campaign's internal Republican poll back 2 days ago, which he released in response to the Quinnipiac University poll showing him down 10 percentage points across the state. It showed him and Raphael Warnock tied. Warnock tied in a Republican internal. We pretty much assumed that that meant that Warnock was ahead slightly. Change Research has a B- rating poll ranking from FiveThirtyEight. This is the grade that it has received. Out of the 109 polls analyzed correctly, about 75% of the time they are accurate as to who wins. So it's not the best polling company, it's not the most accurate one, but it is one that we do have to take into account. And especially since we know what the mean reverted bias is, we can apply that to a lot of the numbers that we receive from Change Research. This is a mean reverted bias of D plus 2.9, meaning that this is about a 3-point swing in favor of the Democratic Party relative to where the actual vote will end up. Now, it's not a perfect science. You can't just take away 3% from every single one of these Democrats and assume that's what it's going to be in the general election, but we never have a perfect science when it comes down to polls and predictions, and we're just working with what we have. So don't expect the margin of victory to be exactly Maggie Hassan plus 6, Catherine Cortez Masto tied, Warnock by 1, Kelly by 3, or by 6, depending on the Republican nominee. These are just things that I would definitely take into account based off the average, and it'll probably give us a general idea, at least, as to where the true stance of the race is right now. So the reason why I'm covering these new polls are because they come into the states where we have been so desperate to see new numbers in. New Hampshire, we haven't seen numbers for quite some time. Nevada, we've started to see a more recent push for numbers, but we still rarely see them. Luckily enough, Georgia has started to see an influx of polls within the state, but still, previously, you didn't see them, at least to the same extent that we see them now. Arizona, a very similar story to Georgia, starting to see a lot more numbers as we get closer to the Republican primary. Georgia, we've already established who the nominees are going to be. Nevada as well. New Hampshire and Arizona are still up in the air on the Republican side, but we obviously know who the Democratic nominees are going to be because they're all incumbents. So we can look at the Nevada and Georgia race with a little bit more of a closer lens than we would New Hampshire and Arizona. But of course, these are the frontrunners within their respective races and will more than likely win the nomination and have had over a year now for name recognition and their ability to promote themselves across their respective states. So we'll start off with the state of New Hampshire. This is a state that back in the 2020 presidential election went to Joe Biden by 7.3%. Now, Republicans see the 2022 Senate election in the state of New Hampshire as something that was a missed opportunity. Not admitting defeat, but rather there was a Republican that they could have ran, 2 of them at least, that would have posed better threats to the Democratic Party than who they currently have. Chris Sununu is the governor of New Hampshire. First elected back in 2016, re-elected back in 2018, re-elected again in 2020 by a super significant margin, now running for re-election for governor. There was so much hype and consideration that Chris Sununu would run for Senate. It would be very easy for him to do so, but ultimately, he declined. Kelly Ayotte, this former senator, I actually might be saying her name incorrectly, so if someone can correct me about the way I've been pronouncing it, I've been saying it this way for 5 years now, but of course I could be wrong. But she's a former U.S. senator, won this seat in 2010, lost it in 2016 by 1,000 votes out of over 500,000 cast, and yet she declined to run again, even knowing how favorable this year would be. Chris Sununu chose to not run even after Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia, after a 10-point Biden state swung 12 points to the right. He knew he could have won, but I don't know if this is exactly what he wants at this point in time. And he made that very clear in his decision. But the reason why I call it a missed opportunity, at least why Republicans also see it that way, is because based off of where we are right now, you've seen lean D, tilt D, toss up. These are the ratings right now for the state of New Hampshire. None of them show the Republicans ahead. And when you take a look at the polls, including the one from Change Research, all of them indicate that Maggie Hassan is going to defeat nearly all of her Republican opponents. But the one person that Maggie Hassan was consistently losing was to Chris Sununu. In fact, not one poll had Maggie Hassan winning against Chris Sununu, because he's just simply so popular across the state of New Hampshire. He was an automatic pickup if he was deciding to run in New Hampshire. Sure, it would have been a hard-fought race, and I don't think Chris Sununu would have won by 30 points as he did in 2020 in his governor race, but I do think he would have won the Senate election. But that simply wasn't going to be the case because he decided against running. So now that we see these new numbers from Change Research, applying the 3-point swing in favor of the GOP and against the Democratic Party, you still see a Maggie Hassan victory of 6 points across the state. I buy that. I buy a 6-point victory being possible or likely. The state of New Hampshire has remained in the lean column in my projections, but I can't say that there weren't times where I had it at the likely Democratic column, at least in consideration. Looking at Change Research, I find that these numbers really pretty much match what we have been seeing, slightly better for the Democratic Party, but at one point I had it pretty solid for the GOP, knowing that Chris Sununu might run. But when he decided against it, it became a lot more likely that the Democratic Party was going to win, and then as the numbers started to recover and more data came out of the state, it became very clear. New Hampshire wasn't going red in 2022, at least at this point in time, and these numbers confirm that. So, even swinging at 3 points, the Democrats add by 6 points in a hotly contested Senate race. Honestly, not that bad of a position. We'll jump over Nevada and Georgia to the state of Arizona because there are 2 possible considerations within this race. Right now, there are 2 Republicans being polled, Lamont and Masters. Now, the interesting thing is that this poll actually dropped Brnovich, the incumbent attorney general from the state of Arizona. When you take a look at the Senate race in the state of Arizona, it seems to be, potentially speaking, a 3-way race within this Republican primary. Mark Brnovich, Attorney General first elected in 2014, re-elected in 2018, which is why many Republicans think he's the most electable. He won in a year in which Democrats elected Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona, in which Democrats flipped the House control in the state of Arizona and the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., and yet Mark Brnovich was still able to win statewide by 4 points in his race. Then you also have Blake Masters. He is someone who had been very close to President Trump, someone who had been very big on being the Make America Great Again candidate, big on being the America First candidate, really trying to push away from Mark Brnovich, claiming that Mark Brnovich colluded with Biden, wanted President Trump out, that he certified Arizona's results because he knew they were rigged, but simply didn't like President Trump. These claims obviously were false. The allegations were entirely inaccurate, and yet he moved forward with them because he knew that's what would win him the Republican primary. Looking at the next candidate, Jim Lamont is a businessman, yet for some reason he seems to be the one who potentially could be in the electable column within this primary. He actually led in the polls for a brief period of time, but more recently, Brnovich and him have started to fall off in favors of Masters now with a 10-point lead across the Republican primary in the state of Arizona. But the also interesting thing about this is that the leading Republican contender, Blake Masters, is extreme, and you see voters pushing against that in these numbers. Mark Kelly defeats Blake Masters by 9 points, but against, I don't know why that popped up. Blake Masters loses to Mark Kelly by 9 points. Jim Lamont loses by 6 points. When you mention Blake Masters' names, the Republican support goes down 2 points and the Democratic support goes up 1 point. It is clear that Republicans in the state of Arizona, or voters in the state of Arizona, aren't as keen on Blake Masters as they are on Jim Lamont. And that's where it gets very tricky, because Blake Masters is undoubtedly the frontrunner. Blake Masters has received some very substantial endorsements across the state. I don't know if they're going to be able to show them, but you have people who Arizona Republicans are going to look to for their nomination. No one more important than President Trump in the state of Arizona. President Trump, who dominated that primary and was able to have such a significant impact on the Republican Party this election cycle in the state of Arizona specifically, especially through candidates such as Blake Masters. Blake Masters will very likely win this nomination, but I can tell you right now, should he win this nomination, it won't be the most electable choice for the AZ GOP. As much as they would have liked to have someone like Blake Masters in the United States Senate, I can't exactly agree, and the data also doesn't agree with me on that point, or them on that point, that Masters is the most electable. So what we find here is that Kelly on a low point is up potentially by 3 points, on a high by 6 points. If these polls are accurate, 6 and 9 points, but realistically 3 and 6 makes a lot more sense. But I can't imagine the GOP having better of a chance with Blake Masters than Mark Brnovich or Jim Lamont, especially looking at the data that exactly proves that point. Now, Nevada and Georgia, two states where we know the Republican Party nominees, where we know exactly how this campaign has already started and is going to go, because these Republican candidates have practically been the front runners for months leading up to their primaries. So this has pretty much been general election season for quite some time. The same can't be said in New Hampshire and Arizona. But we'll start off in the state of Georgia, where Herschel Walker is down 4 points according to Change Research. Now, 4 points I would probably believe. I think a 4-point margin of victory for Herschel Walker is pushing it, but it's not something that if I was to jump to November with no context about what happened between then and now and saw that Walker lost by 4 points, I wouldn't be shocked. I would say maybe something happened, maybe a scandal arose with Walker beyond the multiple that have already arisen against him. Maybe something happened, and I wouldn't be shocked whatsoever. But we also have to remove those 3 points, the mean reverted bias within Change Research. But that still shows Raphael Warnock ahead by about 1 point across the state. When you take a look at the polling numbers in the state of Georgia, they seem to have taken a change in favor of the Democratic Party. Now, I know we talk a lot about polls, and I don't blindly trust them. I can tell you that right now. There have been many polls that have shown Warnock ahead, yet I've consistently remained Georgia in the lean Republican column. But I do want to say that looking at the numbers, Warnock has started to reclaim the lead for the first time over the past 2 months, but for the first time for 3 months. Since November through March, Warnock had not had the lead on the ballot polls in the state of Georgia. And now that lead is still very small. It's nothing super substantial, but it's still a lead. It's a lead when the national environment is so pitted against President Biden and pitted against the Democratic Party that this is very impressive, to say the least. Warnock is a very good candidate. I can't say the same about Walker. I think Walker could win. I'm not saying that candidate quality is the only factor here, because obviously it isn't. Otherwise, Warnock would be easily taking it away with this race. But it also is something to take into consideration, because Warnock is defying many expectations at this point in time. And this poll pretty much confirms that. It shows that Georgia is still neck and neck, as all of the other numbers seem to suggest. It's between 1.5, 0.5, whatever it might be. It's very, very close. And that makes a lot of sense. These numbers reiterate that. But it is something to take into consideration, because even if it is saying that it is close, the conclusion of nearly every single poll that has been released over the past week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month in the state of Georgia is that the race is close, but Warnock, the Democrat, is ahead in the state of Georgia. Not exactly the best look for the Georgia Republican Party. And in the final state, we have the state of Nevada, which many people actually expect to be one of the closest races of this election cycle. I have seen many people, including myself, rate the state of Nevada as less likely for the Democrats than Arizona. On one hand, some people don't think that makes sense. On the other hand, a lot of people think that it does. Catherine Cortez Masto is not exactly someone who exudes the same name recognition, electability, fightability, whatever it might be, as Harry Reid. Harry Reid did very well in Nevada and dominated the electoral politics across the state, established what people called the Reid machine. Now, that's no more in the state of Nevada, and we don't know how that's going to impact the general election. But what I do know is that these voters here are still undecided about how they're going to go. It was close in 2020. Hillary Clinton won it by 2.4 in 2016, and even with millions of more voters voting for Biden than they did for Hillary, Nevada was still decided by 2.4%. This happened because white voters in the state shifted towards Biden, minority voters shifted towards Trump, and they canceled each other out. Now 2022 will be the true test. Do white voters stay with the Democratic Party at the same level they did in 2020? Or do minority voters shift back, white voters shift away, and then it cancels each other out again? Or maybe the white voters leave the Democratic Party, minority voters continue their rightward shift, and Republicans pick it up. It seems to be an extremely close race, especially if Cortez Masto is only ahead by 3 points, according to Change Research. Remember that mean reverted bias is 3 points. 3 minus 3, you're talking about a tie across the state of Nevada, which honestly isn't exactly that unpredictable. So what I think we should take away from this, what I think Democrats, Republicans, independents alike should take away from this, is that Democrats definitely have a much better chance in the U.S. Senate than they might have 6 months ago. They have a much better chance at winning and maintaining control, even though that wasn't always within the books, always within consideration, knowing where we were heading into 2022. But now, following the Dobbs decision, now following multiple other things and candidate quality and decreased enthusiasm and fundraising numbers, it seems to become something that is very much within the realm of possibility. Now, should Cortez Masto lose her race and Democrats win New Hampshire, Georgia, Arizona, Democrats still lose the Senate majority. This is not saying that Democrats are undoubtedly going to maintain it. It's just saying in the states where they're playing defense, they still have a very good shot. We will see what happens, though. We could be completely wrong about this. Change research could be completely off, and that 3-point mean reverted bias will jump to 8-9 points. But at the end of the day, we know the Democratic Party has been leading in other polls, has been leading in terms of fundraising and efforts, and in terms of candidate quality, honestly speaking. So I'm not shocked to see these numbers. I think Nevada will be close. I buy that Arizona and New Hampshire are in favor of the Democrats, but for the other two, it definitely could be as close as Change Research is suggesting, with that 3-point bias taken away from the poll. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.